Hello there. Tonight, we're diving into the wacky, wild, and often tragic history of how a bunch of British traders ended up ruling over India. It's a tale filled with adventure, ambition, and a fair share of mischief. Buckle up, because it's a bumpy ride filled with spice, intrigue, and enough backstabbing to make even Cersei Lannister blush. Imagine bustling markets overflowing with exotic spices, traders haggling over prices, and the air thick with the scent of cardamom and cinnamon. Our story begins in the 17th century, with the mighty Mughal Empire ruling over a prosperous India. The Mughals were at the height of their power, their empire stretching across vast territories, and their cities teeming with wealth and culture. The Mughals, known for their love of all things opulent, had a particular fondness for spices. These spices were not just culinary delights, but also symbols of status and wealth. The Mughal feasts were legendary, with tables laden with dishes that were a feast for both the eyes and the palate. And guess who else loved spices? That's right, the British. Back in England, spices were worth their weight in gold. They were used to preserve food, enhance flavors, and even as medicines. The British were desperate to get their hands on these precious commodities. Only their food was so bland, they practically needed a spice intervention. Imagine a world where the most exciting thing on your plate is a boiled potato. No wonder they were willing to sail halfway across the world for a bit of flavor. So, in 1600, the British East India Company, a group of enterprising, and let's be honest, slightly opportunistic merchants, sailed over to India with the goal of securing some of that sweet, sweet peppercorn action. These merchants were not just traders, they were adventurers, willing to risk everything for the promise of profit. They basically showed up at the Mughal Empire's doorstep like that one friend who always forgets to bring anything to the party but expects to eat all the snacks. The British traders were out of their depth, navigating a complex and sophisticated society that was vastly different from their own. But they were determined, and their arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of India. The initial interactions were a mix of curiosity and confusion. The British had to learn the local customs, languages, and trade practices. They had to build relationships and earn the trust of the local rulers. It was a steep learning curve, but the British East India Company was nothing if not persistent. Over time, they established trading posts and settlements along the Indian coast. These outposts became the foundation of their growing influence in the region. The British East India Company was slowly but surely weaving itself into the fabric of Indian society, setting the stage for the dramatic events that would follow. The spice trade was just the beginning. The British East India Company would go on to play a pivotal role in the history of India, shaping its destiny in ways that no one could have predicted. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just appreciate the sheer audacity and ambition of those early traders who set sail for a land of spice and opportunity. The Mughals, being the generous hosts they were, initially welcomed the British traders. They granted them permission to set up shop in a few coastal cities. It seemed like a win-win. The Mughals got access to new goods, and the British got their spice fix. Everyone was happy. Well, for a little while anyway. But as the decades passed, the company's ambitions grew bigger than a plate of vindaloo. They weren't content with just trading anymore. They wanted power, real power. The kind of power that comes with having an army and controlling vast swaths of land. Basically, they went from wanting a taste of the spice trade to wanting to devour the entire subcontinent. They started flexing their muscles, building forts, and raising their own private armies. Think of it as that guest who overstays their welcome, builds a treehouse in your backyard, and then starts charging the neighborhood kids rent. By the late 17th century, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb had finally had enough of the company's shenanigans. He was like, "Listen, mates, I let you sell your spices and drink your weird tea, but enough is enough." Thus began the First Anglo-Mughal War in 1686. It was a messy affair, full of intrigue, betrayals, and enough cannon fire to make your ears ring for a fortnight. In a surprising turn of events, Aurangzeb actually emerged victorious. He even offered the company a chance to kiss and make up, allowing them to continue trading, albeit with a much shorter leash. You'd think the company would have learned their lesson, right? Wrong. Fast forward to the 18th century, and the Mughal Empire was not what it used to be. Weakened by internal conflicts and external threats, it was ripe for the picking. And who should show up, ready to take advantage of the situation? The French. The British East India Company now had competition, and they did not like it one bit. It was like finding out someone else brought samosas to the potluck. The two European powers started playing a game of chess, using Indian rulers as their pawns. Alliances were formed, broken, and then formed again with a healthy dose of bribery and backstabbing thrown in for good measure. In 1757, the stage was set for a showdown that would decide the fate of India. The British East India Company, a powerful trading entity, was vying for control over the rich and fertile lands of Bengal. This was not just a battle for territory, but a struggle for dominance and influence in the Indian subcontinent. The young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, had the audacity to stand up to the company and their increasingly unreasonable demands. Siraj was determined to protect his sovereignty and the interests of his people. His defiance was a bold statement against the growing encroachment of foreign powers. He captured Fort William in Calcutta, which in the company's eyes was a serious faux pas. This act of defiance was seen as a direct challenge to their authority and a threat to their commercial interests. The capture of the fort was a significant blow to the company, and they were determined to retaliate. They were not about to let this stand. The company quickly mobilized its forces, preparing for a decisive confrontation. The British troops, well-trained and heavily armed, were ready to reclaim their lost ground and reassert their dominance. Enter Robert Clive, a ruthless and ambitious company man who would give Machiavelli a run for his money. Clive was known for his cunning and strategic brilliance. He had a reputation for being a shrewd tactician, always looking for ways to outmaneuver his opponents. Clive knew that a direct assault on Siraj's forces would be risky. The Nawab's army was formidable, and a head-on clash could result in heavy casualties. Clive needed a plan that would ensure victory with minimal losses. So he did what any self-respecting conqueror would do. He looked for someone to betray him. Clive understood the power of internal dissent and sought to exploit it. He began to search for a weak link within Siraj's ranks, someone who could be swayed to his side. He found his man in Mir Jafar, a disgruntled general in Siraj's army, who was promised the Nawabship in exchange for switching sides. Mir Jafar, feeling sidelined and discontented, saw this as an opportunity to elevate his status and gain power. The secret agreement was struck, setting the stage for a dramatic turn of events, and thus the Battle of Plassey became less of a battle and more of a very awkward job interview, with Mir Jafar showing up late and Siraj wondering why his resume was written in invisible ink. The battle, which could have been a fierce and bloody confrontation, turned into a farcical display of betrayal and opportunism. Mir Jafar's defection ensured a swift victory for Clive and the company, altering the course of Indian history forever. The Battle of Plassey was a resounding victory for the company thanks in no small part to Mir Jafar's, let's call it, strategic realignment. Siraj-ud-Dowlah was defeated and killed, and Mir Jafar was installed as the new Nawab of Bengal. Of course, he wasn't really in charge. He was essentially a puppet, dancing to the tune of his corporate overlords. The company had learned its lesson from the First Anglo-Mughal War. This time, they weren't going to risk a direct confrontation with the Mughal emperor. Instead, they'd rule from the shadows, using puppet rulers like Mir Jafar to do their bidding. It was a cunning, if morally dubious, strategy. With their newfound power, the company wasted no time in lining their pockets. They imposed heavy taxes on the Indian population, forcing farmers to grow cash crops like indigo and opium instead of food. They plundered the treasuries of Indian rulers, claiming it was all in the name of trade. The result was widespread poverty and suffering. Famines became commonplace, as millions of Indians went hungry while the company's coffers overflowed with ill-gotten gains. It was a brutal and exploitative system, driven by greed and a callous disregard for human life. The British East India Company's reign of terror finally came to an end in 1858, after more than 2 centuries of control over vast regions of India. This period was marked by exploitation, economic drain, and numerous atrocities committed against the Indian populace. When the British government, horrified or perhaps just embarrassed by the company's excesses, stepped in and took direct control of India, it was a significant turning point. The British Crown assumed responsibility, leading to the establishment of the British Raj. This marked the beginning of the British Raj, a period of direct British rule that would last for almost another century. The Raj was characterized by a complex administration system, with British officials holding the highest positions of power, while Indians were relegated to subordinate roles. While the company was gone, its legacy of exploitation and oppression lived on. The economic policies of the Raj continued to favor British interests, leading to widespread poverty and famine among the Indian population. The Raj may have brought about some positive changes, such as the abolition of sati, a practice where widows were forced to self-immolate on their husband's funeral pyre. This was a significant social reform driven by both Indian reformers and British officials. Another notable change was the introduction of a modern education system. English became the medium of instruction, and Western-style schools and colleges were established, which produced a new class of educated Indians. However, the British Raj also entrenched many of the inequalities and injustices of the company's rule. The caste system was manipulated to serve colonial interests, and racial discrimination was rampant, with Indians often treated as second-class citizens in their own country. The British East India Company's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed. The company's primary motive was profit, and this led to the exploitation of India's resources and people on an unprecedented scale. The devastating consequences of colonialism were felt across the subcontinent. Famines, such as the Great Famine of 1876–78, were exacerbated by British policies that prioritized revenue collection over the welfare of the people. It's a story that's both fascinating and horrifying, filled with tales of resistance and resilience. Indian leaders and common people alike fought against the injustices of British rule, laying the groundwork for the eventual struggle for independence. This period serves as a reminder that history is often written by the victors, who may gloss over their own misdeeds while highlighting their achievements. The British Raj is often portrayed as a period of modernization and development, but this narrative overlooks the suffering and exploitation endured by millions of Indians. It's up to us to learn from the past and strive for a more just and equitable future. The legacy of the Raj continues to influence India today, and understanding this history is crucial for building a better tomorrow. And on that note, we'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate history of colonialism and its lasting impacts.